Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host, as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined by Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp once again to continue our Summer of Blockbusters series. This time we are taking a trip back to 1977 for the original Star Wars, discussing the film and our thoughts on George Lucas's original film on the franchise, as well as the franchise that has continued to this day. We get into a big debate surrounding the history of Star Wars, the legacy of Star Wars, and the quality of Star Wars. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get to our review and our Summer of Blockbuster special of Star Wars. Okay, Jack, again, no face today, but let's start out today, because it is a Summer of Blockbusters episode, with going through just quickly the stats, running through the story of Star Wars. Specifically, to be clear for everyone, we're just talking about the first one, A New Hope, today, originally just titled Star Wars. We're not going to go through all 9 films today, though they're all in their own ways blockbuster hits, other than like Solo, sorry. But the first Star Wars debuted May 25th, 1977. If you're keeping track, that's 2 years after Jaws. We've moved 2 years into the future now. It is an interesting film, just even before release on its marketing strategy. Originally was going to be given a G rating, and they were like, hold up, we don't want to be seen as like a dumb kids movie. Let's actually get a PG rating, please. And let's also be like the first film to open Memorial Day weekend, because everyone was like, why would you open on Memorial Day? Everyone is in school. They're not going to have like every day free for the summer to go see it. And George Lucas really wanted the strategy to be, some kids go see Star Wars, they come back to the playground, and they're like, guys, the coolest film ever has been released. Which is like foundational, because now the summer movie season, well, I guess now technically it starts the beginning of May, but for a long time, Memorial Day became the start of the summer movie season. It's when we started this very series with our Jaws review. So pretty foundational there. But it's kind of weird to think like a lot of theaters didn't even want Star Wars. They had to package it with The Other Side of Midnight, which is definitely obviously a way lesser known film. So how history goes there. It slowly expanded the week of the 25th, and of course was an immediate massive success. In just 6 days, it gained $2.5 million, which at the time was like unheard of. It became the first film ever to gross $500 million worldwide. In 6 months, it beat Jaws to claim the title of the highest grossing feature of all time. 60 films played it for, or 60 theaters played the film for a year solid, which is like kind of insane to think about. Nowadays, a movie is lucky if it gets 2 weeks in, wide release. And there's some films, 60 theaters that just play this for a year continuous. Of course, there was a series of re-releases in the years to come. I'm sure we'll be talking about some of that drama, but the final numbers for Star Wars, $775 million against an $11 million budget. You can't get much better than that. That's pretty damn good. Obviously a long history there with getting that number up there, but still not bad. And, pretty much everyone became an immediate overnight success from the film. So with all that out of the way, let's first talk about, do we like the film? What are our thoughts on the film? Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you. Take it away. What are your thoughts on Star Wars? Take us back to 1977.
Well, I must admit, after what we did with Jaws last week, and we had this little brief chat about this film, I was sort of, I don't know, it's interesting going back into these and like really having to analyze them and then looking at the context of it, because that's really what we're doing. And we're not necessarily talking about the film per se. We're analyzing the events, and obviously the quality of the film is one thing. But going back to something, I don't touch these films much anymore because of events that unfold that we'll talk about later. And I was quite apprehensive going back to this. And for our viewers, we've watched a special version of this film. We've watched the original 1977 theatrical. This is not the 1997 special editions. These are not the 2004 special editions. These are not the 2011 special editions. This is a 1977 35 millimeter theatrical cut of the film, which I think is produced by fans of the film, which we'll get into later on, I'm sure. So I'd never seen this particular version of this, and I've also didn't go into this thinking it would be a different experience. But when that fanfare hit, my God, I'm up on my seat. I'm like, my God, like I remember why I loved this. There's something so cool about this film, and this is 20 years um, uh, old for me. I was born in the late 90s, so this to me is somewhat of a relic. going back to it. But I remember watching these on video. I remember watching these on DVD, and then obviously the Blu-rays. But I'd never seen this version before, and I thought as soon as the Lucasfilm logo came up, and it's completely different, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be really interesting." And granted, did it change the experience to me? Yes. Did it elevate it tenfold? Perhaps not. But this was so fun to go back into and just see little bits. I have some hot takes about it, some mild takes I think other people would strongly agree with. But I just had a smile on my face from as large and wide as you can imagine. This was so much fun to see, so much like fun to just watch. But I, Star Wars to me when I was a kid was massive. I remember I think I said this last time. Watching on the last episode, watching Phantom Menace the cinema. Watched Attack of the Clones at the cinema. I remember at the cinema in Bradford. The oh my god, what is it called now? What's the cinema chain? It's not. It's not Odeon. It's not. It's. I'm blanking it, but I remember going to watch it in 2005. Remembering where I was sat in a theater, remembering all of it. Like these are ingrained into my into my like my life. I remember going to take. I went going to with my sister at midnight launch to watch Force Awakens. I remember going to watch Rogue One midnight launch with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, as well as my sister. And then after that, sort of quiet, calmed down a little bit. After that, I remember going to watch Last Jedi. These are massive blockbusters, like you said. I remember that at midnight screening. I don't know if this was the same for you, but the midnight screening for Last Jedi was 6 screenings packed full. It was so horrific to be able to get to see to watch. It was like massive. So it's interesting to go back and to see where this all started. And like I said, this is really refreshing, really fun, very childlike, very strange to watch. I felt more childlike watching this than Jaws. But I'm interested to know your thoughts because you have a different relationship with Star Wars than I do. So I'm very interested to know what you think about this.
Let's be clear, December, what was it, 15th, 2017? Everyone was there to see The Last Jedi, and I did see The Last Jedi that night. But I did see Ferdinand first on opening night. Let's be
Oh,
clear, I did a
God.
double feature there, which I think says anything.
Right.
Um,
I would not have said that on the public domain, but fair enough. That is brave.
well, yeah, right. Um, it was John Cena was a bull.
I'm gonna say.
I did not, as we're gonna run into with probably most of these franchises, didn't really grow up with Star Wars. Was always around, was always something that was very like recognized, and with high regards. All my friends love Star Wars. I would lie and be like, yeah, I totally know Star Wars, and I've never seen Star Wars at the time. I remember I had a teacher who was really into Star Wars. Like Star Wars was always around, but I never saw them. And my first ever experience was going to Force Awakens opening night because my friend bought like everyone tickets. And I went and I was like, oh, this is really fun. And then obviously watching them and seeing the new ones, watching the old ones. I'm not a huge Star Wars guy. I have a lot of hot takes within the franchise, and we don't need to go film by film. But I will say, focusing on A New Hope, if you want, I guess, on some Patreon for Clapper, we did, I think, our first episode on our Patreon. I don't even think it was like connected to an official show. It was just like a Star Wars debate. I remember Jakob cut an amazing trailer for that, but I'm sure you can find that somewhere on the internet. But
Yeah.
A New Hope, I always thought was fun. I've always liked A New Hope. This is one of the Star Wars films that I've always appreciated. And going back and watching specifically this cut of the film, which I do think makes somewhat of a difference here.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I had so much fun. I really came away from this film, this viewing, which is probably my third or fourth viewing of the film. Really appreciating it in a way I never really had before. I think especially when you strip away all the special effects, all the really bad visual effects, and you're just left with like the sheer amount of creativity and effort put into creating this iconography, creating this world, creating these characters, these costumes, and it all hits. I mean, the lore, the religion, it's so vast in what this film presents, and it all hits, and it all is iconic, and it all stands the test of time. And it's just so fun. Well, yes, I think some of the writing with the dialogue is bad. I think some of the performances are not good. As a little campy, fun 70s space adventure, like I absolutely can watch this film and have an absolutely magnificent time. But I didn't grow up with it. So I fully acknowledge, like, if I watched this when I was a little kid, I probably would feel a lot more, oh my God, like this was magical. But for me, where I am, this is just like a really fun film, part of a trilogy I don't really want to watch the others of. But for this, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, again, from my point of view, I remember having these on video. I remember having the 1997 video releases, the special editions, because the special edition terminology will come back a few times here. And I always remember this one was always interesting, but it was never my favorite out of the three. I always liked Empire because I just thought the world was bigger. I always quite like when something takes us to a very different place within a universe. And we just get more, like you said, more lore, just more sort of depth, more layers. And then I always quite liked Return of the Jedi, but I never liked the opening of Return of the Jedi, and I always thought that the Return of the Jedi was always somewhat similar in pacing to A New Hope, just purely because it was a lot more slow. It was a lot more build up. I haven't seen those films probably since 2017 anyway. So you're talking about 5, 6, 7 years. Um, but I'm never sort of brought back to this franchise. But watching this again, I could understand as a child watching this, it'd be quite slow. If you, once you've got in the context of the three of them, I can understand why this gets to put on one side. And I've always had that relationship. I always thought, oh, I don't really like starting at New Hope. I'd always start with Phantom and the Menace and then work through. But sometimes with this, I always thought, well, I sort of leave it because it's one of those films where it's indoctrinated to its lore and it builds everything. And it's sort of the perfect start to a trilogy, is that it leads loads of breadcrumbs. um, you get iconography, you get really interesting audio of it, especially the score. Visualization, like I said, iconography is very much apparent in this film. And it relies very much on that and then builds upon it in the sequels. So this is ultimately one of those things where it feels like the catalyst, but very much like a prologue, if that makes any sense. So I've always had a very strange relationship to watch it. It's never the one I'm like, oh, I have to watch it. But in the significance of this conversation, the context we're talking about, I can imagine, and part of my friendship, but watching this in 1977 as someone who was like prepubescent, I just, you would not know what the fuck you were watching, because a few years beforehand you'd had sci-fi, but it was always incredibly camp. I think that one sci-fi where it's quite layered and tactile would probably be Planet of the Apes in '68. But that's a decade before that. That's almost a generational gap. If you were 10 watching that, you are now 20, and you're going to watch Star Wars. I feel like it's a big jump. I think the camp terminology here is very much uh, in context of the feature. It's just before it becomes like the '80s. Like we can sort of become more serious now. We can have a lot more like energy with what we showcase, how we showcase it. Filmmaking becomes highbrow. A lot more directors have got an education with it, with a new formula, CGI, etc. Practical effects come more into accessibility, and yet in the same token, um, it's it's probably a little bit too early in the context of being able to absorb those things outright, because it is a little silly, it is a little camp. The dialogue's very very stilted on occasion. Um, People talk about terminology here like Jedi and like a laser sword, and you think like, oh, okay. But I can imagine in '77 that's a back burner. I think this is such a visualized film. I can't remember which director said it. I was reading it today about if a film was on mute, you could understand it all. I think they said about Fury Road, which I was reading about, but I'm not quite sure of the context of that quote. But this is a perfect example of it. You could put this on mute, and it just be like, wow, like I don't know what I'm watching, but it's so invigorating to watch. Yet once you turn the mute button off, and you get that John Williams score, you get the sound effects, you get like this audible vibration of the lightsabers. Like everything here just absolutely slaps. That being said, there are things here, and I'm very interested to know what you thought, because I've seen this a few times. Probably I might have seen it probably 150 times more than you have, but obviously it's more subconscious for me because of watching it when I was in my childhood. This time, I could not help but see things here where I was like, oh, okay. I don't know about you, but when it opens and you get the massive fanfare, and we get into the Star Destroyer, getting what with the Yavin 4 thing. When Darth Vader comes out of the doorway, have you noticed how that shot? It's fucking terrible. It cuts the top of his head off. The camera angles are really awkward. It feels a little bit slightly out of focus. It quick cuts to a close up, then cuts back. It very much feels like a journeyman, and I can imagine we'll talk about it later, but this has been touched quite a lot throughout its years, and I can understand why. Because when you see it in the '77 version, there's a lot of stuff here where it's okay. This is a bit choppy here. It's a little bit stilted here, and I quite like that about it. I quite like that as a blockbuster that made $750 million, that you said. But it's interesting to look at this as a film school project, like we said about Jaws as well, with the Spielberg thing. Now we're talking about George Lucas. We're definitely on a certain track here. But just to bring it back into it, I quite like the fact that it's like very tongue in cheek. I like that it's quite camp. I like the fact that it's very engaging and it's very childlike. And George Lucas has said this, and this is where I'll take it over to you. He said recently at Cannes, and especially at a CinemaCon, that when he made Star Wars, they were for children, but the context of it was like about the Vietnam War, but he made it for a childlike audience. When he made the prequels, which is 20, 30 years later, those people had woken up in the early 2000s at an age of like the late 20s and 30s, perhaps even 40s. And I think the childlike nature had evaporated, and they'd seen on the news essentially the same type of thematics that Lucas had tried to adapt with the original trilogy. And I think the subconsciously absorbed him, and it's not really as fun anymore. You're not looking to escape; you're sort of seeing parallels. So it's interesting how it's evolved like that, and I think for a lot of people in the US, it'd be very different. Alas, it'd be interesting to know your opinion on that. But yeah, I just think that everything here is like perfectly absorbed for a blockbuster. How he signed over the licensing rights for for the profits, because they had absolutely no thought about what this would make, is like one of those genius things that this guy's worth now $15 billion, probably more so now after even selling the rights to it to Disney. So it's very much a lesson in the fact of hold on to what you believe in, hold on to gold dust, because eventually it's going to turn into something very, very engaging. But yeah, I hope that answered your question.
I don't even know if I asked a question, but it definitely answered it if so. I think that's the best part of this film is like, for me, this is the only Star Wars, even in the original trilogy, that has that just natural charm of feeling like a not like low budget and like it's bad, like, but it just has to overcome a lower budget. I mean, even with Empire Strikes Back, we go from what 11 million to like a $30 million budget. It
Yes.
rapidly gets increased. And then obviously you get to the prequels and the sequels, and that's astronomically higher.
Yeah.
I love that there are weird pieces of writing to overcome that you can't pay for C3PO to like stand there and move all the time. I like that there's that choppy editing sometimes to avoid certain things or make, do with what you have as far as sets or costumes or characters. Like, I love that there's this natural charm. I love all the puppets. I love everything like that within the film, which is why I think like this edition that we watched, where you just get that, you just get the low budget. This is what we're doing. We're doing our best with this. It works for me, and it carries a charm that no other Star Wars film has. Again, even in that original trilogy, you start to blow it up to where you can tell like the scale is getting larger. You're starting to not have to make those awkward decisions with dialogue and such. I like that, similar to how you're saying. So I really agree. And I mean, obviously, if you want a masterclass of like selling a film and like, the financials of George Lucas, like he's kind of a genius with this. I mean, there's so many little things you can look into as far as deals he made and how he handled this. Like, he's very rich, and that says something. but I know, and I think that's probably my favorite part of the film. And rewatching that, that's what I came away with. And I think specifically probably because even like because I was comparing this to the version on Disney Plus a little bit, and like yes, you get like the CGI creatures, but they'll even do little things like CGI a sky more and add a transition and like clean it up in general. And just, I don't want that. I wish I just had a version of this for all the Star Wars films, and I'd watch it where it's all really kind of bad and camp, because that's what I enjoy. That's what I find fun. I don't find most of anything in Star Wars to be fun as I find the campiness of this film. And I think a lot of that
Yeah.
comes from the lower budget.
Well, there's two things there. I think part one of that conversation is that I actually really love that he owns the rights to these films. I love that he owns the character rights. Nothing before 2011. Nothing. Oh, actually, it would have been it'd been in 2012, 2013 when the purchase went over, because the Blu-ray came out in 2011. I apologize. I love the fact that nothing went past over his head. He decided on audio, visualization, character names, iconography. Everything went through him, and I think as an auteur, that's quite an interesting conversation to have. It's probably a bit of a highbrow conversation to have here. So I don't want to wrestle with this too much, obviously, because it's just how do we talk about the auteur? But it's good and bad, because the good thing is that it's in one person's control who owns this, and I think I quite like that a studio's not mandating silly things. And it's left to someone who adores the fabric of their intention and the creation. I think as someone who is in the creative arts, like people probably listen to this, and writers who adore film, it's a very limited type of experience that people have. We've said this multiple times on the podcast before, but even the people who made the Blair Witch Project had to sell the souls to Lionsgate to get it made. Even they don't have contributing rights. They don't even get credits. They don't even get retaliation of economics for that because of those. So it's very interesting to know the gamble that he played, and it played out very well. Part of that, though, part two, is that sometimes if you don't have somebody next to you saying, George, let's just rein this in, there's an issue. If you watch the documentary The Phantom Menace, about the making of, which I implore anybody to do to understand Lucas, nobody tells that fucker no. And his producer, I think, is it Rick Young or Rick McCallum? I always get him mixed up. Just says, yes, George, great idea, George. Really good, yeah, really good idea, George. And the problem with that is that because it's your project, it's your creative endeavor, you want to keep total, concise control of it. And usually it comes from a place of, well, art should be a form of discussion before it gets made. And I know there's a lot more ingredients into that. But for anyone out there who doesn't know this, between 1977 and 1997, George Lucas spent $15 million of his own dollars on this film. His own money on this film. It costs more to bear in mind, when this was released in 1980 and re-releases, he'd already changed things, which to me is it's not just the 2011 version. It's you're talking about 2 years after release. You've got to let it live. You've got to let it live and let it evolve. And yes, it might be tongue in cheek, and yes, it might not age very well. But there's a form of beauty there that when someone saw it in 1977, someone in 2027 has the same experience. Has the same visual experience, but has a different emotive experience to it. And I quite like that. So that's where I'll leave that conversation with the touching of stuff. I just think it's not a great idea. But
Well, if I
yeah,
may jump in just very quickly,
yeah,
because I think it's interesting comparing this to Jaws, both of which had very troubled productions. I mean, George Lucas was like openly depressed making this, apparently. He was over budget. It was finished the week it got released. It's interesting comparing, like, imagine if Spielberg went in and just was like edited Jaws and added a CGI shark or just cut around the shark differently. Like, I think Spielberg let that film live, and that really helped the legacy of it. Lucas
yes,
never moved on from Star Wars. He just kept going back, even like to all the versions. directions. He just, keeps going back to them, keeps editing, and it feels like he's just never or wasn't happy with like, okay, this is the cut. Like, I just think it's interesting comparing those two directors and their relationships with their troubled productions. One moves on and the film soars still. One doesn't move on. The film, granted, does soar, but it's just, I think that's an interesting duality there.
No, I also agree, and that also comes into connotations of the sequels with Empire and Return of the Jedi, with two different directors. You have two very similar type of convictions on all three. We have two very different types of styles, and there's a reason why Empire and Return of the Jedi are considered better than this, because there's a lack of limitation with the creative output, because it feels like it's someone's coming in, knows someone who's built the world already, and is just putting sort of this concrete conviction on how to make the film. It's something that the prequels suffered from, and anyone else that doesn't know this, Spike Jonze was meant to make Attack of the Clones, which is fucking crazy. But I think that would have been better for Lucas to then push it down. Lucas should have made one film in each trilogy and let it go. The fact that he let the two sequels go, not this, I agree with you. I think it's very interesting because it's also a knock-on effect of Coppola making Apocalypse Now, which was meant to be made by George Lucas. They fell out during that, so it's interesting that Star Wars has a massive connotation within the blockbuster, but also with the film school unit, which we were talking about last week with the De Palmas, who, when George Lucas screened Star Wars to, I think it was Spielberg and De Palma, Spielberg said it was atrocious, and De Palma said you need to like add something to the beginning of it because like nobody has any idea, and that's where the opening crawl came from. And De Palma edited that for him, so this has fingertips of a major amount of creative endeavors from filmmakers. But again, I have to sort of agree with you in the fact that it's like, bear in mind, he'd made THX 1138 in 1971. He'd made American Graffiti in 1973. And then Star Wars in 77. I know that more American Graffiti came out the year later, but I don't think he was very much involved in that. The problem with Star Wars is that it came at a time of a blockbuster that made him so much money. It made that this franchise is that he was encompassed with it. He became devoured by an entity that was so economically powerful. I can understand his plight. I can understand that you can't walk away from this now because it's massive. But the problem with that is, I think I always look to myself like, what we could have had another Star Wars. What else could he have done? And perhaps it's like a lingering thing because you've got like this massive entity. But for me, I'm like, I don't know. I have positive experience with it, but I just think what he could have done creatively, what he did with THX, with the actual studio that he made with Lucasfilm. This is massive of making financing the Indiana Jones movies, with the video games, with the comic books. It has a massive legacy. This Star Wars film as a blockbuster. This goes through mediums. In fact, like I said, with the video games, comics, novels, books, action figures, all sorts of shit like that. Like with the Ewok stuff and the holiday special, this became something on a level that Jaws didn't even anticipate. I think it's hard to put into context of how massive this film is. This is the definitive blockbuster, I have to think, because of how much it evolved. This not only made sequels, it made a saga, it made a franchise. It is now in TV shows. Jaws is a limited thing of going to watch something in the summer. This thing has evolved in a generational things of people, which is actually crazy to think that in 1977 watching this and then to come in 2024 and see how much this has evolved. It's absolutely crazy, from seeing iconography like Darth Vader, which it's this very strange, when, I don't know if anyone's seen, there's a very much infamous Akira Kurosawa film where a Japanese character is living in like the Russia or something like that. Is it Dezu Ala, something like that? It's very much inspired, the inspiration of Yoda, and obviously a lot of the Kurosawa stuff, like the Hidden Fortress, and very much Throne of Blood influences Star Wars. So it's all here. It's not just an entity that's singular. It has a lot more of inspiration.
I mean, I also will say, like, I appreciate that Lucas would turn around and help out Kurosawa. Just, I was looking at his credits. It's funny to see, just, I mean, even with just his producing work, Star Wars, More American Graffiti, Kagemusha, which we weirdly talked about last week. Like, he continues to work as a producer, which is nice. But I agree. I mean, he is such a clear mind for, like, again, I mean, it was almost overwhelming really seeing just how everything we kind of take as being Star Wars lore and Star Wars iconography that has lasted this long. I mean, this many projects in a franchise is very rare to see,
Oh
and it
yeah,
all just still hits. It also hits, and it's mostly all there in that first film. It's just it's especially with a low budget. It seems like it would be so easy to cut so much of this out and just keep it simple. But Lucas pushes forward with like a clear effort and clear toll on the production to give so much, and just for that voice and that effort to like as a director be absent until 1999, do 3 films there with the prequel trilogy, and then just be gone still. Like that is, it's sad to see, and I'm happy he's able to have his influence, and I hope he's like happy, being a writer, being producer, and blah blah blah. But like, um, there's so much more I feel like we could have got from him. So I will say that is a little bit of a disappointment.
yeah.
Um,
Alas, though, I will say this, not to contradict my point, and I add this to what you've just said there. I do quite find it interesting his whole creative output within cinema, because you look at the film group and they're all filmmakers. Some of them are writers. Quite a lot of them are directors. We look at the De Palmas and Spielberg. They're directors. Scorsese is a director, although Paul Schrader's the writer. Paul Schrader becomes a director very much sex later down the line. Lucas is interesting because Lucas is the writer, Lucas is the producer, and Lucas is the director. And throughout Lucas's output, he's done a lot of directing work, which is lukewarm to say best. His producing work is pretty good, but his writing work is like outstanding. And it's interesting to know that when you see a creative, where they think their strong aspects are, what they feel the need to make their own work, to direct their own work, etc., and what they feel the need to just produce someone else's work, or I'll write this for my friend, like writing Indiana Jones. So I find it really interesting to look at Star Wars in the 77, A New Hope. He's writer, producer, director, and then in the latter two, he's producer and writer. And then he felt the need to make the 3 prequels as all 3 of them again, but yet he would only produce, the likes of Indiana Jones and write them. He never wants to direct them. He leave that to Spielberg. I find it very interesting because he's very much a creative output. He's a very good producer, but he's a very good writer. And I think Star Wars melds all those together, and proves that you can have your cake and eat it in a creative sense. And allowing it to go and evolve to someone else to make it is not necessarily a negative thing, and it actually helped the franchise. But it must have killed him with Empire to be like, I can't make that. I think like you said, I think there's a trouble with Star Wars not knowing it's ever going to get made, if it's going to kill someone, kill his career. People go through that sort of output as well. But no, I think it's absolutely fascinating to look at a creative who understands when to let something go and when to allow it to something else. But I don't mind bringing the hot takes out here, though. However, there is a there is like this there's like this myth, let's say, or this questionable conversation about Star Wars kills careers. It kills creative careers, let's say. And with the prequels, they always say one of them gets out, if not two, but really one of them becomes the star. And then when you look at the prequels, it's definitely Ewan McGregor. When you come to the sequels, it's definitely Kylo Ren. But those two had already had a career before. I said very much a career in its own right before, whereas even Natalie Portman had, but Hayden Christensen hadn't really. I know he had Shattered Glass, but nothing really, and he had Jumper afterwards. With Daisy Ridley, she had a career. She got cut out in between us too. For any fans out there, like she wasn't very much high praised, and I think John Boyega had definitely had a career, but it wasn't as big as I think as Star Wars has put on a platform. When we look at the original 3, there's always the token of it was only really Harrison Ford that came out of this and went on to do other things, ironically playing a very similar type of character in visualization with Indiana Jones. I don't know how. I'd be interested to know your opinion, because obviously with the Carrie Fisher thing and Mark Hamill, I have to say this: watching this, Harrison Ford's a fucking star. It reminded me of watching Jeff Bridges in Lightfoot and Thunderball, with the Michael Cimino film with Clint Eastwood. In the I think that's 74, and I know that Jeff Bridges and like the likes of Kurt Russell both went for Harrison Ford, and I can see why that character is absorbed by those performers. You can just tell, like, cowboy in space, definitely Harrison Ford, Kurt Russell, Jeff Bridges, that type of role. It sort of like clicked with me that that was always going to make someone a star, because it was very much not like a heartthrob, but the anti-hero, never gives a shit, stylish, cool, didn't wear anything stupid, had a cool weapon, had a cool haircut, etc. Right? With the other two, it's different, because you've got one playing a princess and one playing like what essentially an idiot that turns like not stupid, which is Luke Skywalker. And everyone watching those films as a kid, it plays to every kid in the schoolyard, which I think is fucking brilliant writing as well. Like you said, he was like, "Oh, people don't get to see it. Go back to the playground." Like every kid who, like, if it's girls or boys, can be any role here. I fucking love that. It's such creative writing that you don't allow anyone to go watch this at a young age and not see something in someone and go back and be like, my God, like I love Princess Leia, I love Luke Skywalker, even Darth Vader to some extent. But Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill are limited with their roles, because Carrie Fisher, and I don't want to shit on people here because I'm not here to do this, but you have to look at the role and what's been envisioned. The Princess Leia role is a damsel in distress. Granted, she's very boisterous, but that's Carrie Fisher. You can tell that, like, that's her, like, giving her all, and she's quite charismatic into a very limited type of role. Hamill isn't very charismatic in that, and you can tell within the first bit when you're meeting on Tatooine. It's very much, that's why I come for the stifled dialogue. Like, some stuff he says, I'm like, oh God, like I can imagine it. Now he'd be rinsed. He would be torn apart. And the best thing with Mark Hamill is that he becomes very, very much more stoic in the sequels. Here, it has to have that wonderful naivety, that ignorance, and the film changes 3/4 of the way in. But when you lose that form of love and affection and a smiling character and that childlike aspect of it, and you get a very much more serious thing, and it's an issue that people have always plagued Last Jedi for, which I don't think is right. Because granted, the stuff in that film I'm not particularly keen on with Luke Skywalker, but I'm not a fucking purist. But he was always very much a stoic. After seeing Ben Kenobi die, he was always a very different character, even after finding out who his father was. Like, his relationship in Return of the Jedi is very different with everybody. He's a man in black. He's a Johnny Cash, you know. And then when you watch it in Last Jedi, I don't think that is a very much distance of a stone throwing of what we saw here and latter half of it. But I just don't think there's much evolution in that character. Granted, narratively it is, but I don't think thematically there is, because he's very stoic. But out of the three, I think it's fair to say there was always going to be one person who was going to go out to do other things, and it was always going to be the Han Solo character, no matter who it was played. I would have liked to have seen Jeff Bridges do it, but it was always going to be a star. But I just want to know your opinion on it, because obviously you see it as I don't think Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher or even Harrison Ford, you don't have the posters in the wall or anything, Carson. I'm not saying you do, but knowing your sensibility coming into this franchise as where you are, and not having a much affection for the lore, would you have said the same thing on this rewatch, or would you have had a different opinion then?
Hey, I saw Mark Hamill sing the Child's Play Chucky song live at Comic-Con, so I have a
Oh
connection to
wow!
him.
Well, sorry.
But no, I mean, I fully agree. I mean, obviously Harrison Ford is just, I mean, even in the entire trilogy is given the coolest stuff to do, the coolest lines, the coolest roles. Um, I agree with your take on Carrie Fisher. I think Hamill's like a two-pronged issue where I think he really is lacking. The first is just, I think he's not good in this film. I think he's not good in a lot of the films. I think he eventually finds his pacing, but I think a lot of that's also due to his screenplay. It's a
Hmm.
very confused character that isn't ever really given the substance to the arc he's on. He's introduced as this like naive teenager, like just a teenager, and you lose that incredibly quickly as he has to go into being this lead
Yes.
protagonist. Like, and there's no in Empire Strikes Back, you at least get that meditation with like Yoda, and you can see that development. Here, it's very much so he's a teenager, and then he's this hero, and you don't get that bridge to where like if I am Mark Hamill and trying to create a character, trying to create a performance that feels normal on this progression, it's not like I'm given the substance to be able to really do that. But I think also he's just not that good in this. I mean, it is rough, and especially like it does him no favors to be so directly physically and just like narratively next to Harrison Ford, who is, you know, killing it. It's just in a cast where I think everyone is performing well. Obviously the weak link is going to stand out, but when that weak link also has bad writing and is at the forefront of the film, it does not help anything. I do find it strange that I didn't know ever that this film got an acting nomination at the Oscars. Alec
What?
Guinness got nominated for
Oh,
supporting
okay.
role, which is
Yeah, yeah.
fantastic. Definitely like the right choice, and I think he's really good here. But yeah, I don't think out of everyone Hamill really delivered. So I don't know.
Well, do you know what? Ewan McGregor, the last year when he played Obi-Wan Kenobi again in the Disney Plus TV show, is the same age as Alec Guinness was when this aired, which is fucking crazy. I don't know what is in the water in England, but something and it's just affecting Alec Guinness anyway. But no, I agree with you. I know. I think not to take it so much into Mark Hamill territory about damning him, but I also think it's an issue that George Lucas can't write children. He can't write. Well, he can in a sense, but I think he can't write naivety very well. It's either is or isn't. I think the only thing that is a bona fide style because Harrison Ford has a genuine charisma within his characters, and I think that comes across Indiana Jones as well, where you have very much a one note character, but he's very much two dimensional. And I think it's like that B movie thing that George Lucas brings to everything. But the same issue with plagued Hayden Christensen and the prequels 20, 30 years later, because you have the same issue as the Luke Skywalker effect in that you're trying to watch a child or someone very childlike become, will have to be forced through multiple different avenues in his life, become very mature in front of your eyes. And the issue is that you don't get to see him being like when he's naive, he's very naive, and when he's very stoic and very serious, it's very serious. It's like I said, it's like the on and off switch, and the writing plagues Hayden Christensen, and I think that it's not a bad performance at all, but he's directly a consideration of Lucas not being able to have like a amount of depth. And then when you know, like he has, I don't know if anyone knows this, but a lot of people I've mentioned that he has a lot of script doctors in Lucas's work to clear the shit up. Carrie Fisher had to be one multiple times throughout his filmography because he just goes in and is like, right, let's shoot, does two takes and that's it. He's not an actor's director. He's a visualization director, and when you can watch the first Star Wars, I think as that blockbuster, that sentimentality works very much akin to success because it's a visual and audible intoxication. And like I said from the beginning, when you have the da da da, and you have the Star Destroyer just going over the screen, and it's the magnitude of it all. It's like it's just perfect of someone who knows the visualization on screen that then can affect the audience to know shit like wow, you know the scope, you know the scale, you know the game in the first 10 seconds of this film. Whereas the writing of it is just not something that sort of lives up to the anticipation of watching like a massive film. It's strange. It's interesting because I don't find him, like I said, as I think it's multiple times been said about an actor's. It was very difficult to work with him. I think multiple people have said that because of his attitude towards if it's on the screenplay, just say it. It's not as easy as that. That's an issue that will plague him throughout his career. But going back to the success of this film, it very much is that charismatic Harrison Ford thing. And I forgot like how much this film probably heavily handed follows all three of these characters quite well as well. You get to sort of know a little bit about them. The the thing about it though, on reflection, is that Princess Leia and Luke have very interesting arcs in that they're very similar. They both come into this world, one a little bit different to the other, who's naive, the other one knows the game, which is in Princess Leia. they both have something taken away from them, which is Alderaan, and then um, Luke's adopted family, which is essentially is his uncle and his auntie. Um, and then they come to find like Harrison Ford, but Harrison Ford's Han Solo like has nothing at stake here. He doesn't have any vendetta against the Empire. He's just doing it for like the shits and the giggles, and I quite like that as the trope of the cowboy. He just gets drafted into it. He's got no skin in the game, and I sort of like that factor that he's just a third party. He could go anywhere. He's not bothered about it. He just loves he loves like the attention, loves the adrenaline. It's actually quite refreshing to watch that on retrospect because I've never actually noticed that is that throughout this whole trilogy, he becomes intertwined with it on an affectionate level with Carrie Fisher's Princess Leia. But aside from that, has no real purpose coming back into these sequels. And it is just that charisma, it just that is that flamboyance that gets him back into it. But it's very interesting to note because I've never actually realised that. But that is just the skill and charisma of a character. And also, not to point this out, but that's what makes this. I don't know if you're not well known of this, but the who shot first is it Han or Greedo?
Yeah.
Like it's actually like it's so much more apparent that Han Solo would shoot him first. Like the re-edits of all that have been very similar. Here it works excellent. Guy says to him, "We'll take your ship." Like, no, thank you. It shoots him dead. I quite like that. I quite like that it shows that he's very quite calm, cool, but also calculated. That's another thing that didn't need to be changed. But there's a lot here in character moments I quite like.
And I think it just helps the Han Solo character. I mean, feel like, I mean, we talked about like, if kids on the playground, who do they want to be? Han
Hmm.
Solo is the coolest one because he's there just because I mean, he falls in love with a woman. He is just there because, I mean, well, actually, if you watch Solo, a Star Wars story, you will see the backstory, but
Yeah, yeah,
um, he's automatically just the coolest one. And he's also like the only one who doesn't have any, special magical powers. He doesn't have the
yeah.
Force. He's just the everyman who is there, like doing what he can. And for that, he's just automatically the coolest. Like he's the one that you can role play, and you don't have to be like pretending you have a lightsaber, right? You can just be Han
Hmm.
Solo. So and also just with, I mean, the writing, with the performance, like everything comes together in this kind of magical way just to create like a really entertaining, iconic character. Like I can see why he's so popular.
Yeah, I also think as well, just on that note, is that that character questions the um, the depth and the knowledge of this universe as well. He questions what is a
Yeah,
lightsaber, what is the Force. I think that actually helps Harrison Ford not giving a shit about what this film's actually about either. I think it actually intensifies his relationship with the character because I don't think he cares much about the law. I don't think he cares much about like how much people put into this because it's very much a one note character. I think that helps that the performance tenfold in the fact that him questioning it also feels more in person of Harrison Ford questioning it, and those two characters become, like I said, as one. But I agree with you completely. But it's interesting to watch Carrie Fisher here as well because she has something here.
yeah,
But out of the three of them, I would never have thought. Well, nothing really did, to be fair. But you can just tell that. Oh, I think it should be better to mention as well is that Harrison Ford had been in little bits of stuff before this. The other two, very little. Like this is also an occasion of a film, and to put into context, this released with 1 star, like 1 star, who is not the target audience whatsoever. Nobody is going into this for Alec Guinness. So you have got
right.
to bear in mind to put in context now. This is like opening an X-Men film with, like, I don't know, like Charles Xavier played by Anthony Hopkins, and nobody else you've ever heard of. Like it's
Right.
quite interesting to put that into context of that. This came out of absolutely nowhere with nobody in it,
Yeah.
and I've tried to redo that with the sequel era, but to very much it's a pre-existing entity at that point, isn't it? So it's not very fair. But
Yeah.
this defied everything that was set against it. Having to double feature, opening on a day it didn't want to. Probably, I think the scroll was done like a week before it went to like press print. Had no opening stars.
Yeah.
You couldn't put any name on the fucking poster. You just had a lightsaber and a guy all dressed in black. Like that you've got to think like that is absolutely crazy. It defied every manageable odds, tangible that was thrown at it. It's actually crazy that this is an entity that we have to speak about now. But you know,
Yeah,
it,
never tell them the odds. It was that
oh,
perfect shot right through.
I
um,
love that though.
and it allowed,
Yeah,
yeah, and I think having the like no names, they weren't. I mean, I think even Harrison Ford, like if I remember correctly, was a carpenter and wasn't going to even be in the
yes,
film, and then they wanted him to audition. Like it allowed this sort of like Beatlemania almost to surround them. I loved reading of like a bunch of stories of like they became overnight sensations. Harrison Ford was shopping, I think, for like vinyls and had to leave the store because people were like grabbing him because he was so famous, like tearing his shirt. Like
yeah,
it allowed this sensation. But I think when you talk about Star Wars, and you mentioned earlier, like it doesn't make stars. Granted, Harrison Ford overcame that eventually, but like when you're nobody and then you became so closely considered and acknowledged as that character, it obviously puts you in a box. And I think it's both
yes,
a, it's great for the success and the legacy of this film because you will always like have that connection with these original characters and these people, and it allows you to fully lose yourself. You're not watching Timothy Chalamet as Willy Wonka, you're just able
yes,
to watch Willy Wonka, right? But
yes,
for those actors, undeniably, I think it's not necessarily the best setup for them, especially because consistently rather, Star Wars, like, and this is not to shit on anyone, but like a lot of the actors that you see that are in Star Wars in a leading position and then drop off are not necessarily the best of actors. Like Peace and Love, Daisy Ridley has not necessarily proven to be like an Academy Award worthy actor. John
hmm
Boyega's had a lot of other issues, so I really want to explicitly not put him in that boat where he's been really fucked over by a lot of studios. But like, Mark Hamill is not necessarily a great actor, right? Like, I
yeah,
think it's just it sets them up to be in that box, and then they don't have the ability to break out of that box based off their um what they're given, but also just they don't have the goods to do that. Which is like and I'm not trying to shit on anyone,
No, I
sorry,
I know
Mark,
you,
but
but yeah. Well,
yeah,
I'll even double down on that. To be fair, I think it comes down to a conversation twofold. The first one, like you said about, is that ultimately these films own you, and I don't think that's a great relationship to have with something because it's like um, on the gravestone. It's just going to be there like, may the force be with you. I don't know if as an actor you want to have that relationship with one certain product and not really being able to reach out. And there's a really fun bit of Simpsons when Mark Hamill guest stars on it, and he's doing Guys and Dolls, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's Luke Skywalker in Guys and Dolls," and he does like the Guys and Dolls a bit, and he has like a lightsaber in it, and it's funny. But the deeper detail of there is that he could never escape it ever, and it's only when he did he voiced the Joker in the DC universe where even just probably now that's the one where it feels at least something, because that he's in Body Bags, the John Cam to Toby Hooper movie in 1993. Like what, like that's not someone who you would have thought 20 years earlier was in, well, not even 10 years earlier. It's in '83 with Return of the Jedi, which had been massive. So it's interesting, but again, back to it. The second issue, and it goes back more sort of Daisy Ridley, is that getting these people, they can pay them scale. They can pay them $25,000, and that's it, because they're not in their contract. There's nothing to mislead them into thinking, well, you're not bringing any audience here. We're bringing it to you. And then she renegotiated a contract, I think, to about 1.5 or maybe even 10 million. I might be missing a note there, with Last Jedi, and then presumably with whatever's going to happen now, with whatever shit they're going to do with her, which is, I think, absolutely abhorrent. But we'll get there one day, I'm sure. Um, I don't know. I agree with you. I think that paying them, getting someone who is very much um, not of stardom is a genius in this world, because you lose yourself into it perfectly, and the fact that you can get someone who buys into it as well is genius. And I think it's a very rare occur. Well, also it's also a double standard, because once you see these people as these characters and they're not doing anything else, you buy into the lore more because you believe a reality in them playing Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, etc. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no pre-existing formula to be like, oh, but he was good, he was better in that. I see Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker. I see Princess Leia as Carrie Fisher, because it's the first things I ever saw them in, and probably the only thing they really did that was massive. They become intertwined into it. But I do think it elevates the material with them being unknowns. especially in a universe that makes you really have to believe into it. Like there's a lot of talk here. There's very little showing. There's a lot of talk about what this is, what's the Force. You know, I can't remember like if Darth Vader's even mentioned. Like I think Princess Leia actually mentions, but like we have to believe what Alderaan is. You know, like there's very few things here that's like show us, not tell us, aside from the two suns dropping, where it's like, wow. But again, it goes back to the visualization and iconographer. He's a very interesting creative director who knew in a blockbuster that let's not tell them everything. Like let's just sorry, let's tell them everything, but not explain everything, and they'll work it out and like let them have the experience. I don't know if that flies today. I think me and you would rinse this today. I just do. Not to speak for you, but I just get the impression that this is like I had the same issue last year that Force Awakens, right? And I think you've got to compare them now as blockbusters because they both did absolute massive things. They both had to restart. Well, one had to start a franchise, one had to ultimately restart it again. They brought in um, a very relatively unknown cast. They brought in a director who saw the vision, but the screenplays are horribly the same. They even to the extent of narrative, it's like they kill off a major character that they do here with Obi-Wan Kenobi. There's a lot of conversation about what is the First Order, who is Snoke, like here with Darth Vader and even the Emperor. You don't know anything in these films, but you've got the hindsight of the saga to actually look at it in context. If you look at this as an entity, it's very difficult to have a realization of where this is going, what this is all about. It very much is a clusterfuck, and I say that in a wholehearted openness of like genuine honesty of visual, 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 verbal, 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 audible, audible, audible. But there's absolutely no depth here. There's absolutely no explanation. It's all exposition. This came out now, we would probably have major issues with that because I mean, who is Darth Vader? Like, I mean, who is Anakin Skywalker? Who is Ben Kenobi? Like a strange man. Like, why are they killing these people? Um, like how is he with the Rebel Alliance? Like, why is Princess Leia like? Why is she a princess? Who is she? Why is he after her at the beginning? With what are these plans? So yeah, you can understand like why he had to put the scroll in or the opening crawl. But there's a lot here that has a lot of leeway for its audience. The audience have got to put a lot of stuff in here, and it's interesting when you compare this to Jaws. That Jaws, what you spoke about last week, is that there's those moments of pause, reflect, character moments. I don't know how many you could count here, aside from when Ben Kenobi dies and he's on this in the back of the Millennium Falcon with Princess Leia, and there's that one moment, but it's not very performed very well, and it's not got that sensibility that Spielberg had. It very is, and then into that context very quickly. It's very well paced, very fast. At 2 hours and 1 minute, it's ferociously quick. But I felt that the beats were very weird here again, the action beats, and it goes back to your point in that everything here has to come in the context of it's a director who it's very janky, it's very jerky, and it's a film that isn't like I don't know how to say it. That's not doesn't sound disrespectful. You probably find a better word than I would do, but it still feels like muddled. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know how you would feel if you watch
Yeah.
it now. Do you know?
Well, there's this like duality of like what is this film trying to be, because we have the context that we have the trilogy, we have the context that there's this franchise. In 1977 there's no promise that you're going to be making Empire Strikes Back, there's
Well,
no
yep.
promise you're going to be making this trilogy. So the film both has to like build this world where there's enough stuff to explore if we continue going, but also like stand on its own. And it's trying to do so much. I mean, with that, it's trying to introduce the world, introduce these characters, give them the stakes, and take away, the destruction of the planet, the death of the parents, to send them on this journey, plus giving them then this arc and this final action set piece that is worthwhile. There's so much crammed into this runtime that there's no wasted space, simply because like there can't be. There's, if anything, it could use another hour to really flesh everything out. um yeah, I mean, and I think that's also one of my biggest issues with the other films. I think the pacing in the other two of this trilogy are like god awful, but I really, yeah, I mean, I think it has to walk with that balance of being standing on its own while also being open to what is to come, because obviously there's a very rich world here, right? So,
Yeah, and I also have to say, for one positive, the thing he got right here is the iconography. Everything here is like so wildly intriguing, so interesting, so simple. It's like it's got weird aspects of like military Nazism here, and then you've got Darth Vader all in this black, like latex, but very much like a plastic suit. Who's like 6'9". Voice doesn't match at all. Very strange. Then you've got like the robes, you've got lightsabers, you've got the vehicles here. There's so it's just to watch this on a design level. Like I said, just putting it on mute, I find this exhilarating to watch. That there's a creative endeavor here where, as a child, you can pickpocket every single sequence and be like, "That's amazing! I love the detail." And it's one thing with the franchise that gets better and better because the AT-ATs come in the sequel. Then you get like I said, the second Death Star, etc., etc. But here it's like you get the lightsabers. Everything is so fundamentally cool, so engaging, and it is one of those things where it does hide the fact of the hindrance, like you said about pacing and and stuff, exposition where you think what, like, what older on and fuck knows, you do allow that to be bypassed because you are so engaged with a visual aesthetic here. And watching it again, like the 1977 version, like it's got the pink hue on the lightsabers. I find that really cool. It feels grimy. It feels a little bit more dirty. It doesn't feel fine tuned, and I find that aesthetic even more engaging. Into seeing these designs. The fact that like these two bodies are burned alive, like that's quite risque for its time, especially for the blockbuster. But you have like the Jawas, and we're on board that spaceship. I'm like, fuck it, like, sorry, we're on board their like big vehicle. Like, fucking hell, we're in a Terry Gilliam film here. Like, there's so much to unravel. There's so much inspiration here, especially 1981. Sorry, 77. Sorry. It's so engaging at each turn. Like Moss Eisley, like the ship they go into. I mean, the design of CP3O is fucking crazy. Full gold droid R2D2, which I think is like one of the most fascinating. Like I still have an action figure from I think 2005 that still plays. I think I've got it somewhere. I won't have it in this room, but I've got it somewhere. It's stuff like that where nothing has been changed. They never had to change anything about the lightsabers. They never had to change anything about the designs. R2D2, C3PO, Darth Vader. They got it right so well the first time. And I don't know if you do you ever have you ever seen the Ralph Quarry like art designs of these?
yes, I have.
Like it comes down from that, doesn't it? It comes down from brilliant storyboarding, but creative output of people who had like an idea, who were allowed to put it forward. I just think it's brilliant to watch as a blockbuster. Like it very much deserved. And granted, I'm not. It's like difficult to say. Oh, like George Lucas deserved $15 million. No, I don't think anyone deserves that amount of money. Like, but that being said, I'm really happy that this was like the big one because watching this, it's like, what the fuck is next? You know, like we're going to go into the 80s very very shortly. Obviously, we're going to the Reagan era as well. It's a difficult time, um, but within cinema, like you've had Apocalypse Now a year earlier, that it feels like bygone era for Coppola with The Godfather. Like, what is next? Like in 5 years' time, you get like the Terminator and stuff. Um, it's so fascinating to watch this. As a kid, even to be an adult here and going to watch this, I'm like that. You talk about that FOMO. This is heightened. This is something different. It's like not only can I not wait for what's next, I can't guess. Like now, we have like this realization of like we know where things are going with AI and stuff, and we know like very few things. It's like, oh, that'll surprise me. You know, we all know what goes into movie making. The conviction of it and the final product is always one that surprises. If it's like Furiosa and Dune and other things and etc. You always know there's going to be sort of this predisposed knowledge of success in a way. But with this, I would be like, chomping at the bit. I'd just be so shocked. So, oh God, like I just speaking that now, like I have goosebumps. Like, what the fuck is next, Carson? After a new like Star Wars, we have Star Wars. What is next? And for the next few years, it's just carbon copies, isn't it? It's just like it's like the Matrix Reloaded, or even the Matrix. You've had something that's so idiosyncratic and so multifaceted with its iconography, so distinctive with flair, that the next few years you have parody, you have copycats. Like Jaws had the same things, yes, but that's different because they could go with violence. This could never reach it, and you had to wait 3 or 4 years for the sequel, and even then it blew people out the water. Those copycats couldn't even take 10% of the success of it. So I don't know. I put myself as someone who's like 13, 14, 977 watching this. God, like cinema would be so good. I'm not, granted, it's not like it's shit now. I'm not trying to say like, oh, we're living such bad times, but you know what I mean. Like the possibilities in 1977 watching this are endless. What is next?
I mean, have a door to literally like the universe. You know what I mean? Like you can create a different universe and go there and like experience that on the big screen. That's like to understand that for the first time and see it and experience it, just even like with the iconography as we keep mentioning, like that's an incredible feeling, the possibilities. And I think it's almost depressing then. I mean, maybe getting more into like legacy of the film and maybe, sticking to Star Wars more than overall film, but like it is sad to see like where it's evolved, right? Like even just Star Wars and like the ideas behind how Star Wars has grown. Like it's just so, I find, boring and depressing and sad to go and look at like the energy and the inspiration here and the magic here, because there is a magic, right? Whether or not
Yes.
you want to talk about the narrative or the writing or the acting and all that, it is a film and we can analyze it as a film, but undeniably there's a level of magic here. And it just feels like that magic got like it's like it's a lemon and it just got squeezed and all the juice is drained out. Like it is sad to see the visuals of this and then look at the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, or any of the Disney Plus shows, or even like the new trilogy of films, the sequel trilogy, even though I like one of those. It's like there are bits there, but it's just so sad. Like to see that instead of evolving and instead of going to these new possibilities, it just stayed so stagnant and safe and so corporate to a point.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, and you can say that about film overall. I mean, we're gonna get more and more into modern blockbusters as we go, but like, there's just no magic anymore like there was for Star Wars. Partly because we've seen the art form, right? We know what this
Yeah.
art form is
Yeah.
capable
Yeah.
of in a way, so that's natural to a point. But like, it doesn't even feel like there's efforts being made. It's just, I don't know, it's sad, not to, and we cannot do this every week where we talk about a great film and then we're like, actually now it sucks, and I promise we won't do this every week, everyone.
Yeah.
But like, it's hard to then like look at now and be like, well, this compared to what, like, you know the Fall Guy, and it's like, well, okay.
Well, that's going to get a reappearance later on. Don't you worry. But I agree. I think it's you cannot overestimate or sorry underestimate the power of magic with cinema. And a lot of people throw that word out, and it comes off across like tripe after a while, because it just feels like such a definitively stupid thing to say. Like, magic, what do you mean? Like, you bring the enthusiasm to it. Not at all. Not in every case. Sometimes a film has magic, and this is it. It's like, ironically enough, like the first Harry Potter. Granted, the context of magic in there is a bit more fruitless, but it's like just transported to a different world. Like the power of cinema, like Jurassic Park, which I'm sure we'll get a conversation on later on in a few weeks. But there's a magic, a majesticness to those films where they transport us. We don't have to to give the film all of our time and attention. It takes us away. And cinema throughout this era now is not a reference line of modern day, contemporary time. We're not looking at the likes of Police and French Connection, or like the religious zealots in The Exorcist, or the mafia in The Godfather. We're looking at a time now where it's like, this is so far beyond us. And granted, there'd been stuff beforehand with, like, Barbella and stuff, and Dark Star, which is 74 with John Carpenter. So sci-fi has been somewhere. With 2001 is another prime example of like, what, we've been taken somewhere completely. We're not even being told what it is. This one is like very much the childlike version of it, but I love that. There's one thing I had in my notes I wanted to tell you about, right? About Carrie Fisher, because there's always like people having like these Carrie Fisher stories, and I found one here, right? So when they went to go film in England, they all decided to fly coach, which for anyone in England is called economy, to save money because they didn't think like you said before, I think no one had any idea. So all the cast, including George Lucas, who was financing the fucking thing, all flew economy coach class. Right when they got to England, Debbie Reynolds was told that Carrie Fisher was flown coach and economy, and demanded with Fox to speak to George Lucas. So in a hotel room, George Lucas answers his phone, and all the cast are in the same room, and he's on the phone for 15 minutes, just being absolutely annihilated by the late great Debbie Reynolds, right? Annihilating him to his face. So after about 15 minutes, Carrie Fisher says, "Can I just talk to her?" And George says, "Like, yeah, okay, you talk, yeah," like that, puts it at the front of her. And I've got it in quote. I've got to quote this today. Um, the, I'm sorry, I'm prefacing it laughing because I find this really funny. Sorry, but Carrie Fisher responded, "Mother, I want to fly coach. Will you fuck off and put the phone down?" And I'm like, knowing that's in 1976, 1977, and knowing that like the woman who Carrie Fisher became, and those outlandish stories, and who she was a girl, like she got around, did everything she wanted to, lived her own life. She was always that girl. It's not a thing that she evolved into, and I love those stories. And I also think as well, when you see the behind the scenes and you know the story with her and Harrison Ford, she's actually adorable. Like there's certain set photographs where she's trying on like David Prowse's glasses, and she's like this she's like this angelic aspect to this production. Like you can tell the stories behind the set hilarious. Like when she talks about like George Lucas with her with the Princess Leia slave costume, and she's like why am I not wearing underpants, George? And he's like, there's no underpants in space. She goes along with it, it's like because she's like, I don't know, I just find that like she has that wonderful sensibility of not taking anything too serious. And I think it's an interesting that when you look at Carrie Fisher and you look at Princess Leia, them two ultimately become to evolve very close as each other, and it's so much more beneficial to watch that as her here. It's not really Carrie Fisher; it's Princess Leia when the two ultimately come together. Like I said, especially Return of the Jedi, and you sort of get that in Force Awakens a little bit, but at times gone on a little bit more. I really like that. I always find it quite affectionate to talk about Carrie Fisher because she's very much the one that's like just doesn't really give a shit. But she was adorable. She took everything, and everything with her. But I like that. But yeah, it's a film that deserved its hype, deserved its plaudits. Um, but yeah,
Undoubtedly. I mean, even if I'm not like, if we compare this to Jaws or maybe other films in this franchise or in this series, I'm not as big of a fan as this one as the others. Undeniably, for the time being released, undeniably for the people making it, this was a massive effort and it absolutely hit and it still slaps. And it just like, I don't know, again, I could have fun with this any day of the week. I think culturally it holds up. Now, obviously, spans a giant legacy, but when you go back to that first film, very different than a lot of the other ones, but I think still very worthy. So obviously I'm happy.
yeah. Have you ever heard about the Spielberg thing with him as well? You said it very briefly before about that he thought this was going to bomb, and then when he missed the premiere, and they went to go to Hawaii, him and Spielberg, and I think Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out the same year, which is fucking crazy to think those two films taking again. I talk about like a reflection of humanity. Where Close Encounters is quite hitting quite close to home with the human characters, where this is such an outlandish exploration of like science fiction, like it's an escape, whereas Close Encounters isn't. I think George Lucas and them spoke, and George was like, "It's gonna bomb. The Star Wars is gonna bomb. You're gonna take everything I've got here. Like you're ironically gonna kill my career." And Spielberg was like, "No, no. Star Wars will make loads of money because you're gonna take people away from what's happening in the 70s. Let's think of the fallout of Vietnam and etc. And we go into the political endeavors of out the Nixons and into the Reagans and stuff like that. Um, and Spielberg was so like fundamental in it. It was like, look, let's do a deal. If your film makes loads of money, which is my bet, you give me 2% of the net sale profits as it goes on, and I'll give you 2% of Close Encounters. and Spielberg won. So Spielberg still gets the 2% profits of this film every time it gets a check. Which, knowing that the film made, like what you said, 300 million domestically, and you went 750 million, that's crazy amount of numbers as well for a film from your friend. So again, like loads of good lore here as well. It's a film that's aged really
Oh
well. It
yeah.
has a really good backstory. I can imagine the making of would be really interesting. They shot in
Yeah.
Tunisia. That's still there. You can go visit that. It's just crazy to think about. It's an English and
I feel like
American
that's one of
production.
the Yeah, I feel like that's one of the big things missing from film nowadays is like this. I don't know, like it's so fun looking back and hearing all the stories of the filmmakers and hearing the stories of production. And it's like you look at films now, it's like, well, I don't know, what are the really fun stories we have from like the making of the MCU? Like what are the fun
Yeah.
stories we have? I don't know. It just, there was this element back in this time we're talking about, and as we evolve, we're going to get more of it, and then we're going to see it slowly drip away. Of like, there's this charisma and charm just to filmmaking, to the process of being on set, that I think has really been abandoned due to a lot of reasons. But I don't know, looking back, like it's always, you can sit with a friend and chat about these films and laugh and have this great time, and like it just warms you up to these films even more. The story of what went into them, I don't know, it's like, it's, I don't know, like, sad part of modern cinema, again, not to be depressing about it because there's a lot of good stuff, but like, I don't know, I miss that.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not hearing like, I'm not hearing Chloe Zhao on the set of Eternals like, oh lol, this is such a funny story.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
but Chris Evans, did an autograph on that bomb. Sorry, artifact. Sorry, diffused.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also think that if this came out now, they'd be like, you're gonna have a man playing a big dog with a belt around his shoulder, and you're gonna call it what? Like, there's a lot here where it takes like to pitch this film would have been and pardon my French, an absolute fucker to do, because you've got to have total conviction in your product. I can imagine having to convince Fox executives would have been the hardest thing to overcome, because you're selling a film and describing it, and the final product, granted, it's nowhere similar, but it's a hard sell. It really is, even on the surface. But you've got alien dialogue here that's not even dubbed, not even subtitled. Like, that's what? Like, in 1977, we can't understand what Chewbacca says. We have no idea what the droids are saying, but everyone else can. Like, that's a really fun detail, but it's one that watching this as an executive, I would not have. I don't mind saying this out loud. Watching the first cut of this as an executive who would perhaps finance this, I would be slightly worried. And the fact that it overcame that is even more power to it. But like you said, it has a mythology even outside of the lore that it created. Peter Cushing's in this, who's a Hammer horror actor, wore slippers because his boots were hurting all the time. That's like a little fun little tidbit. Peter Cushing, you've got Alec Guinness, you've got a lot of people to buy into this. It's a great time in the 70s to bring the new and the old together, and it melds really well. I have loads of affection for this film, and it's an affection that, like you said, not to shit on the modern day standards, it hasn't aged at all really well. From 1977 to 2015, it was like, in 2015 the whole thing about Force Awakens was like, we're bringing back the animatronics, and I'm like, why are you selling your film? Why are you selling Star Wars about animatronics? That should be a singular aspect of it. That should never been in doubt. Like, oh, we're bringing back animatronics. We're bringing back the practicality. Why aren't you doing something fucking different with it? Like we know animatronics should be an aspect of it. Why do you have to bring someone back in a black mask with a red lightsaber? Can you not do something different? There's got to be more people in this franchise than a fucking Skywalker, and it's the issue that this franchise has ultimately succumbed to with Rise of Skywalker, which we're not going to. I swear to God, I will not get into it with you. I can't do it. I did the review. I took the review for Clapper when it came out in 2017 because I didn't want anyone else I'd have to deal with that for my sins, for my sins. But even that about who are you? Like, I'm a Skywalker. That's not what this is about. Star Wars is not about the Skywalkers. It's about the universe of being Star Wars. And I think the aspect of these TV shows, like you said beforehand, are not quite getting that now either. They did at the beginning with the Mandalorian, and then, but then we have to get the Boba Fett. We've got to get it back in. We've got to go back to Ahsoka. And after the fact, it's like Acolyte's going to be very interesting, because Acolyte comes out in 2 days' time as a 2-hour premiere. that's the one where it's very much pushing against. I think there's one character that they've said that's relevant to the law, and it's just like a third party character. It's not anyone big. It's not the villain or anything like that. It's going to be very interesting how audiences take that, because that's got risks in its narrative storytelling, that it doesn't devise itself as something with preconceived. Yes, everyone has a lightsaber, and we're having all these actors that are big. Carrie-Anne Moss is in it, Go Girl, loving it for you, and stuff like that. But Daphne Keane and Amanda Stolberg and stuff. But even then, it's a franchise that has never been able to let go of it. This film does not hinder itself on who was a Skywalker. It's not about that. Empire makes into that. Return of the Jedi dedicates itself, and then the prequels dedicate to themselves, and then for some reason the sequel trilogy opens itself up of not having to deal with that, and then succumbs to the very same thing. This is very freeing in that we're just going to talk about Star Wars, and it's in a franchise of this magnitude. You know, I think it's quite rare. You said about the MCU. One of my favorite films about the MCU is Ant-Man. Why? Because it's silly. And why? Because it has nothing to do with anything else until we get to like one of the other ones. Iron Man. Why is that so fun? Because it's got no idea what that film's about. Like, and the side you get to the post credits. I like that. Why do I like Guardians of the Galaxy? Why are these the better films? Because they don't hinder themselves to have to work them in a dedicated way into like Iron Man needs to be involved. I don't know how you feel about that. I like that it's freed. Um, and yes, it does lead into it. Yeah, it's the first thing. But I like this is Star Wars. Nobody knows who fucking Luke Skywalker is now. Nobody knows who Skywalker is. I like the fact that it's very much see is what you get, and I find that quite freeing and opening as an experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think you've I mean, you can like again, not to just get into modern cinema. We will get there, trust us. But like with every film, it's like or every franchise or every series, there is nothing more boring than being like this is going to be a big connected universe and it all has to equal or lead up to this big climax. Like I like having these individualized stories. I mean the tracking of the Mandalorian and how that series evolved is like almost shocking how it finally was like they released this series that had nothing to do really with the rest of the films and everyone was like, oh, this rules. And then they're like, oh, people like this, well, we can just put in all these old
Yeah,
characters and then they'll like the old characters. And it's like, what are we doing? Like what do you mean that this like everyone is like, thank God this finally doesn't have any connection, and then you give it the connection and then no one cares about it. I mean, I almost think with Star Wars it's interesting, and like we've obviously taken a really big break from theatrical movies or movies in general for the series. Um, it's interesting just seeing the goodwill evaporate. I worked at a theater when Solo came out, and we like overstaffed. We were ready for the Star Wars crowd, and that was the first time where like the Star Wars crowd just didn't show up. It was dead opening weekend. With these Disney shows, every single time it feels like less and less people are talking about them. It is one of those things where like it's wild to be in this position with Star Wars where it's like if you want to capitalize it, and it does seem like they're starting to put the pieces and path together for the future of this franchise, you need to like rebuild it in this way that I don't know. Like I don't think even if the Acolyte, let's say, is really really great, is it going to have the eyes on it to where it's going to engage the Star Wars fans? I don't think it is naturally. It just I don't know. You've like Disney has really shit the bed on this one, obviously. I mean, as they have with the MCU, as they have with most things. It's really wild seeing the hype that was there with The Force Awakens, and it felt like no matter what you do, you have this fan base, you have this energy, and then they just murdered it, and then we'll see what happens next. But like, it's in a rough state. We'll see. But I don't know. It's just like it's such a misunderstanding of Star Wars and what interests people that they went down the route they did. So
yeah,
rough.
and it also feels like a weird like to sell toys again, like to make some like Disney rich. Like if they're in it, we can sell their image. I don't know. I there's a lot. There's a it's a very much multifaceted conversation with Star Wars as it evolves, because it becomes more of an economic product, becomes a dynasty, but also like a bank. It becomes this drip, drip, drip that is just constantly feeding other people. And like you said, I find it. I just look at this and I look at the enthusiasm and I look at like the wonder here. And as things goes on, I just get that I think it becomes a corporate product, but not necessarily against Star Wars. I think everything becomes that. I think everyone's favorite thing ultimately becomes privatized by a studio because they know shit we can make money about this. I have it with the Matrix. Not that we need to go into it, but I'm sure you'll have stuff where p- studios ultimately take ownership of it and like don't quite understand what makes it tick, but no, because it sells money, we'll do it again. And I think throughout loads of franchises you get into that aspect of it's like, oh,
Right.
really. It's a tale of time, isn't it? Like you go back to the Universal movies we've done on here with the James Whale stuff. By the time in the 40s and the 50s, they had no idea what made it work. It seems really strange how we can talk here and we can understand why things work and why they work and what works and what doesn't. Yet people who are talking about 200, $300 million projects, if not 500 million, 600 million, $1 billion investments, let's say, don't quite understand or justify their own actions of what they do with this product. I mean, the problem with it, I keep on saying it. Star Wars is a product. It needs to be served. It needs to be sold, and making a new character that runs the risk of everything like that ultimately will come at a detriment if it doesn't work. And your conversation about your comment about Solo is similar to mine. I remember going to watch, like I said, Last Jedi, 6 screenings at midnight, all sold out. It was horrific. It was like rush hour, not the film, obviously. The rush hour in the crowd. Everyone's packed up. I remember going to watch Solo at a midnight screening, and 3 people were in my screening, and they had the audacity to put an NDA out on the front to write that you weren't going to spoil anything. And I was like, are they expecting this to be massive ramifications? And it always stopped my interest about what we would see in that film. And aside from like what Darth Maul turning up, which never came into anything, like what a waste of time. They didn't quite understand what made Star Wars, but by its own admission, it became the Skywalker saga, didn't it? Audiences were told that it was a Skywalker saga, and therefore that's the only thing they wanted to eat. It's the only thing they wanted to be dictated towards, to obtain. We want more the Skywalker, and by doing so, you can't evolve, but you make the same thing, and it's successful. So maybe I've answered my own argument there, but Solo is not a bad feature, but again, it hinders itself on a pre-existing product. When just make something different, make something unique. I've watched a few episodes of Mandalorian, and I'm like, I just get bored of it. And I've not watched Boba Fett. I did watch Obi-Wan Kenobi, but even then, I just like, what are we doing here? This is 6 hours, and it could have been told in 2.5 hours. Could have been told in three. I don't know. I get the impression that after a while, you just get your soul sucked out, don't you? You become so desensitized to everything. But that
Yeah.
being said, I do hope that people who watched Obi-Wan Kenobi, who watched Force Awakens, because I fucking love Force Awakens the first time I saw it. I do. I found so much affection for it. All my friends who at the time at university were like, oh, let's go watch it. I had a friend, Kieran Stringfellow, who was a friend of the podcast, um, filmmaker in his own right, incredibly talented. He was in tears watching the trailer. Like it brought people back down to earth. It was like this is a monumental event, and I remember going to see it and be like, "This is amazing." And then you just like it was like what we did here. Like you just like the massive smile. Like my God, like what's the possibilities? Like who's Snoke? Who's that? And just it just turns into like a corporate product of like we've got no idea, and we know that you guys do. So maybe you should tell us what you want. Um, but we can't. But then it becomes like they can't tell us enough, and they can't tell us anything. Hence
Yeah.
of
I mean,
Snoke.
I don't know. Like, I feel like you're not being vicious enough to Disney because, like, how they've handled Star Wars is not just like how every franchise becomes monetized or whatever. Like, they're the ones who really, you have to pay $6,000 to go on a shitty Star Wars hotel for 2 days, right? Like they've bastardized every single part of this and just like cashed in all their goodwill and all their checks, and like just to try to get as much money as possible right now with like no concern on if anything is going to be worthwhile to the fan, or if like it's not
Yes.
just like, oh, they've monetized this. They have fully exploited this and milked it dry, and then they're like, wow, it's we milked it dry, when it's like, no shit you did, because you've done nothing good with this thing for
Hmm.
years. Like, what are you talking about? And not just like, oh, we made some creative decisions that are bad. They openly and willingly like are just trying to rip people off with this franchise, and it's just wild to see. And so like, I don't know, Solo has is, I think, a very telling film in the evolution of Star Wars. I don't really want to get into it. If anyone is interested, Uncut Gems
Yes.
did a full Solo episode. Genuinely, I'm not kidding, the most depressed I've ever been on a podcast, where I was
Yeah.
just like, I
Tough.
hate this. Like I
Yeah.
I never want to talk about Star Wars again. Here I am years later. We finally are over that. But like genuinely, it was such a depressing experience. But like
Yes.
from that point on, it's just been bad. Like everyone was like, "Oh, Rogue One wasn't good," but like, okay, it was like fine. It was like 3 star. Okay, there's something here. It was just a misstep, and then since then, it's just been like dropped in a pit. It just keeps going lower, and no
Yeah.
one cares. And it's odd to see, because there's so much potential here. Not just, it's wild to be like, this conversation, like if we're talking kind of even more like financially, there's so much you can get from Star Wars, much less artistically everything you could do with it. But like, I don't know, when you sell again a $7,000 Star Wars hotel for 2 nights, and you have one droid and you have one person in makeup, or like two people in makeup, like that's fucking insane to be like, that's a Star Wars experience. I don't know, it's wild. I think like we will look back in 10 years and be like utterly shocked at, when we look back into like out of context with space, what they did to this franchise. And it's like sad, because while I want to villainize like Disney, and I want to villainize what Star Wars has become, you look back at the original film and it's like, no, it's actually really worthy, and there's so much here. There is that
Yeah.
magic here. And just like, you kill that magic, which somehow makes it so much worse. Like, I don't know, it really bothers me to talk about
No,
Star Wars.
look. I think everything of that is completely valid, and I'll double down on that. The first aspect of it is that, speaking of the issues of the sequels, the one thing that they don't have is Lucas. Say what you will about the prequels; they're his own products. He made them with his own money. I won't say, I won't particularly go too deep into those on a bad word. When you put your own money, you can do whatever the fuck you want to do. If that's what you believe in, and you put your money down, like Coppola's done with Megalopolis, or whatever it's called, Megalopolis, whatever it's called. Um, you know, to get a detractor in a review saying certain things, like the guy made it with his own money, like refinance things. You know, you've got to put it in perspective. These people are making art for the enjoyment of other people, with a detriment of their own financial recovery. And that's frightening. Can you imagine doing that now? Like one of us doing that? That's fucking crazy to think about. And granted, these people are playing with are juggling with millions of dollars in investments. Don't get me wrong, but that's still like a product that's quite frightening to even have the conviction of. The issue that with the sequels in 2015 is they took George Lucas's idea but wouldn't take his ideas, and that what works so what works so successfully out of the three products here, the three trilogies, what's the best one? The original. Why? Because Lucas was a writer and producer, and his creative endeavor was carried by others who could better put an output out. And in the prequels, they're the second best because he's there as an output with his creative endeavors, but he also puts himself front and center as a director, and he doesn't have the probably have the sensibility for it, and probably, if we're going to be very harsh here, creative output on on a director's level, working with actors. And then you get the worst trilogy, which is a sequel one, because he's not involved at all. And granted, there will be a point where he won't be involved, even if he did the sequel trilogy his own way. You know, the guys in the 80. There's a time we have to step away. But the people who took that on, which is Disney, tried to revitalize that. This is where I come in my secondary issue, in that it becomes a corporate product. It becomes an issue of people in a room, stockbrokers, who are dictating the play and the pace of what we can have here. What we'll do is we'll have a black actor, right? Supposedly being the Jedi, which will bring a certain demographic in. But what we will do is we'll take that away from him, and give it to the young lady, Daisy Ridley, who can't act, and that's what we'll do. We'll take one minority of watching these films, which will be the gender argument, and we'll take the other aspect of people we can get absorbed in who are on a racial argument. What were they thinking? Like, let's have a black Jedi. What's the big? Yes, we had Samuel Jackson, but like, not someone who could look at Finn as a kid and be like, shit, like, that's amazing. Like, even at Daisy Ridley, let them both be Jedi's. Let young girls and young kids see not really see gender or race, but have it at a subconscious level. They fucked that over because they wanted to dictate to like this narrow-minded thing of like, we want to be open, we're LGBTQ positive, we're very much open to having minorities on board, and they just piss the bed, they shit the bed. But the issue is, right, and I'll say this as well, is that even with Star Wars getting lukewarm reviews, or Return of the Jedi, or even Empire Strikes Back, there was never a condition to be against making more. Even if they were commercially successful, but critically they were maligned, very much like the prequels were. George Lucas didn't look at that and thought, oh, he didn't fucking stop and be like, oh my god, they're telling me I need to kill myself. I must stop immediately. He had the courage of his convictions to carry on with his art form and release them into the world, and they've evolved very well. People hated the Phantom Menace. People hated Attack of the Clones. People were very much more lukewarm on the latter two. Don't get me wrong, but people hated Phantom Menace, especially now. And then it's softened down because the shit you get now without any soul is so much worse with a film that's sort of maligned. Christ, I can watch a film with heart and soul that's like iffy rather than watching a corporate product where it's like, you've built that purposely to get an audience in, and you've built that purpose to get an audience in. There's no soul here. But the thing is that with Solo, is that as soon as they get a little bit of like pushback, we need to stop, pull the brakes out, gang. Solo's not done very well. Let's ruin his career. Let's ruin their career. Let's bring Ron Howard in for no apparent reason because he's not doing anything of reason of this quality. Let's pull the brakes. Let's can the Obi-Wan Kenobi. Let's can the Boba Fett because a few fucking people have said they don't want to watch it. Oh my god! And then they've been dictated to by a fucking audience. Last Jedi. I don't like The Last Jedi. I'm sorry we're going somewhere here, Carson. I'm sorry. I'm on a rant here. I'll be very brief, and I promise to the audience I fucking will be because I hate this conversation. But even I don't like The Last Jedi. But do I appreciate the courage of its convictions by Rian Johnson? Yes, because he didn't give a fuck what the audience wanted. He gave it to them, and it will evolve, and it has a heart to it, has a soul to it. It might not be the film I wanted, but it lives on its own jurisdiction. It lives with its own heartbeat for good and for bad. And what did they do? Oh my god, we can't have this, Carson. We can't have this. The Last Jedi, people were indifferent on it because it took risks. Oh no, let's bash Colin Trevorrow. Let's get him away. It's not like he made $1 billion at the box office the same year as The Force Awakens with another property that nobody thought was going to do brilliant. Let's fuck him off. Let's bring the hack back in, JJ. Let's go against everything we've done beforehand, and let's make a wildly stupid, inconsiderate, inconceivable, and incoherent sequel. And yes, it will be getting a mention very briefly in the next segment, I'm sure. And let's make a dissonance completely, and let's undermine everything we've built, and then audiences might accept us. No shit. Let's go to TV. Let's drown our sorrows. Right, we can fuck that off now. It's done. We can sell the box set, the Skywalker Saga, 9 films, because Rey's one now. Anyway, yeah. Granddaughter to who? Never mind. Jodie Comer's a mother? Never mind. Right? So what do? They go to TV to minimalise the chances of it being horrific. But what do? They go on iconography back to the Clone Wars, which everyone sort of shit on, now they adore, and they brought back Yoda. They cannot still get away from issues that have come before. It's Grogu. It's not Baby Yoda, but it's people in this franchise cannot escape from it. What do we do with Mandalorian? We have to bring Boba Fett back. Okay, we have to bring Ahsoka back. Every opportunity they get where it gets a form of success, and I think you have mentioned this, so I do apologise for regurgitating the same thing, but every opportunity these fuckers get by starting fresh, they have to they have to resort back into making it something. Oh, but like Green Yoda will sell a shitload of these. Get him back in. Remember Boba Fett? He's died. We haven't seen him since 1983. Get him back. I just think it's such a sad state of affairs when you watch this and you watch a naivety to it, an ignorance of not knowing what it's going to be, and still it's very pure, very fun, and just get what we get now. I don't know if you know this, right? But in the film, you don't even have Darth Vader's theme. It's not been written yet. John Williams hadn't written it yet. It comes in Empire. There's so much that this doesn't have. It has no Yoda. It has no iconography. It's just so limited, and yet it's so powerful in that. And yet they've not ever been able to register that. So I don't know where I want to go from there, but I'll leave that to you. But it is so disheartening to see where this has gone. It really is. But like we had with Jaws, we still have the first thing, don't we? Have the house that built it, and nothing will take that away. I will say this though: the one thing that's not been particularly good about this film is that for a very long time, you couldn't access the theatrical cuts. I'm pretty sure you could on the laser discs, but ultimately they're really expensive now because they have the theatrical versions of it. They have the mono sound, but you can only really get that in Japan, which I think our versions were actually cut from, and probably US markets. But you're talking about thousands, if not up to like double digit thousands. It's that expensive to get these now. So the wonderful thing about the digital market is that people fans of this have found original prints, and they've put them into digital files, and everything still sings and dances, and it's that aspect of digital media which I'm fascinated about, that people still hold that very dear. You can still find that, but for a long time, if you didn't have the print for this, you were sort of fucked, because you had the laser disc, but I mean, who had the money for that? Then you had the videos, which they were 97. They came in with these digital special editions. So for a long time, you weren't able to access the theatrical cuts. So at least now there's a wonderful, if there's a glimmering hope here. While I'm smiling while I say I'm happy, I'm not annoyed at all by this conversation. If there's one glimmering thing on the rainbow, is that we can still access the theatrical cuts that no one's messed with, and that's such a very much inspiring thing that this fan base still to this day puts these up to the rest in the zeitgeist, and it's still held very, very, very warmly and kindly. And I think, as we both said, deservingly so. Whew.
So I take it you don't want to do individual episodes on all the sequel films.
No, I think that would kill us both. I think I'd wake up in the middle of the night and
Yeah.
just have an attack.
Well, no, I think we can kind of close our conversation on the original Star Wars, because the question of the week you kind of set up perfectly. There might be some really strong opinions here with our fan base listening into today's episode. So I really kind of wanted to poke the bear and ask not what's your favorite Star Wars film, but rather what is your least favorite Star Wars film? Jack, I assume I know your answer, but I would love to hear you say it.
Right, can we three to Rise of the Skywalker? I mean, I don't want to go too much into it. You can read my review. That film, I actually, oh God, I when I was a kid, I adored Star Wars. Like I said, I still have the toys, I have the posters, I had the videos. I used to make my own. This is quite sad, this, but as a kid, I used to make my own like ships out of like recycled shoe boxes. Yeah,
Oh,
like
that's adorable.
yeah, I fucking adored this franchise because it was always like a massive escape, and we only had six of them for a very long time. And when I was at 18, 19, obviously the sequel trilogy happened. I was like this is going to be like amazing. But in the back of my head, I was like, I might be too old for this now, and I don't want to experience that. I don't want to go into something and be like them ruining my childhood, because that was the era where when you hear it all about this film ruined my childhood, like it shits on my memories. I just didn't want that to happen. I didn't want to have to think like that. I've never had to deal with that. I never had to deal with the Matrix. I never had to deal with like the Shyamalan Unbreakable stuff. I haven't ever had that issue with a film. What I've always loved and adored. I've never had to have it like rectified. and seeing where it's gone, and seeing that like they just had no fucking idea with a product that they assemble as a product, which I don't want to shit on these people, and I say this in the most affectionate manner. These films mean a lot to people. Like, people define their lives on it. They get these images tattooed on themselves. They name themselves after it. People. This is a religion to people. This is not a film. It evolved furthermore to this. These are people with personalities. You have to take that with such empathy and intrigue and understanding that these are not things to just pump out and like, oh, we'll get, like you said, $7,000. People will go there and a necessity because that's their lives. They're all encompassing Star Wars fans, and I find that a genuinely perplexing thing. But I also find it like really heartwarming that they found something in their lives that they're fulfilled, and they have something in when they were alive that gives them life, gives them warming, and gives them like a reason to get out of bed. And I find that fucking brilliant, right? And for what's happened to those people, I find either they don't really accept it just yet, or are generally heartbroken themselves of what's happened to this franchise. And if anything exemplifies that, it's the rise of Skywalker. They've just got no idea. The films. I cannot believe I had to write a 1-star film for a Star Wars film. And that breaks my heart. That genuinely, from having to do this episode and having the like living like watching these films in the theaters and growing with it, and not having any idea who in 1999 who these people were, but watching it, I was like, that killed me. It killed me. It killed after watching Rogue One, which I really enjoyed, and Force Awakens, because Rogue One is very much the one that I feel like is like these, because it has to be, and I like that. I like that it doesn't have, and that has production issues, and they have no idea. They're just messing with things that just for like economic greed, and I just think you get to that film, it's like we listen to like you talking about actors who are paid to be in these movies, and like, are you going to return to Star Wars? No, not if I need a new house. I'm like, where's the fun? Where's the affection? Where's even the like Daisy Ridley said that 2 weeks before she started filming, she had no idea who the parents were in this film. Like, people on set were asking like it was a joke. Like, we're hearing like Ian McDiarmid's back, like Palpatine's back. Like, we haven't shot anything with that, and they're like, oh, you'll have to see the final product. Enjoy it yourself. That's quoted by people on the staff here. And that to me, as a multi-billion-dollar industry, that's absolutely appalling. And that film, I know you have differing opinions of me on it. I think we come from a very different emotive place on it. But I find that the principal factor utterly abhorrent and disgusting. And that film is just the embodiment of just absolute grossness. So that's my least favorite.
To be clear, I never said Rise of Skywalker was a good film within the, like, if you actually want to take it as a part of the series.
Of course.
I just think it's fun in a vacuum, but valid.
Yeah, I'm glad you had to undercut me there and be like, that we have to make it fun, because otherwise this is fucking depressing.
Well, for those at home, it was a double feature for press that day of that and Cats, and that's not my worst opinion.
Oh my
of the day.
god,
so,
Jesus!
Yeah, right. But imagine, well, it was a great day for me. It was the only person to enjoy that day.
Judgment Day,
yeah. For mine, I think I'm not including the Christmas special, not including the Ewok films, because that's just bullshit and boring to include.
Yeah.
Solo is awful.
Wow.
Solo is the only film from this franchise where I've like spiraled him and like I hate actively everything about this. I think it is like a sign of everything wrong with how Disney is handling modern Star Wars, and it's just like the antithesis of fun. Again, go listen to Uncut Gems. Yaka Flash does his best to defend it. It's one of those times where I was listening on the podcast to him, and I love Yaka. This is not slander to Jakob. He has a unique skill where he will say why he likes a film, and I will sit there and be like, oh, I actually dislike it more. Like, I'm actively hating this more while you talk about why you love it. And that was probably the best example. He was talking about what it does right, and I was like, yeah, actually, I hate everything about this film. If it wasn't that, it would probably be The Phantom Menace. But for me, Solo is the bottom barrel. But
why the fuck is Woody Harrelson in a Star Wars? That should never have got past, like, that. It's another thing. It's like, what's going on here? Why is Woody Harrelson? Like, it's strange.
There are a lot of questions you could ask about that film.
Why is the guy from Kingpin in this? Like, that is fucking wild to me. That's
Yeah.
fucking wild. But that is a great example of being predisposed to other things. Because Emilia Clarke was in Game of
Oh
Thrones,
yeah.
she's the best there to be in it. What? That girl can't act. Like I'm sorry. There's a lot. I agree with you. I think I remember doing that
Yeah.
podcast. And I was like, I enjoyed this, and then I was like, I don't think I like this anymore. You know, like,
Yeah.
what is
Yeah.
going on here? Why are you having a robot that like what? What Phoebe Waller-Bridge? What is going on here? I don't know. I'm confused. I'm concerned. Is that
Concerned. That's a good
2018?
word for it. Yeah.
What year is that?
I want to say 2018. I think it was that or 17.
No, 17 was Last Jedi. Solo was 2018, and
So it was
Skywalker was
18.
2019. Yeah. Fucking hell, how many?
But it was like May, wasn't it? Yeah, May 10th,
Yeah,
2018.
because it came out in the original things when they came out in May, didn't they? Because these now come out in December, which is another thing that's
Yeah.
shit. Oh God, What's Ron Howard doing that with that? I don't know. What's going on there? I don't know. What went wrong with these things? Like what? Why is Paul Bettany in
Look,
this?
I'm sure there's someone who could do an absolutely amazing breakdown of like bit by bit where Star Wars went wrong. I'm not that person. I don't think you are that person,
I don't
Jack,
want
where
to
we
be
would
there.
do that. I'm sure we
I
could.
don't.
I don't
Yeah,
think that's
I
on the
agree with you.
agenda, but
I agree. That needs to die. This is it.
I don't.
This is scratching itch for me. Okay, this is more like this has turned into therapy for me. So I just want to say thank you for this. I'm emotionally crippled from this now. I feel physically ill. I feel like I've told my therapist in a
Yeah.
public auditorium things I probably shouldn't have said, and I feel physically repulsed. So this started from a
Yeah.
place of wonder and intrigue and love, and I fucking hate everything about this.
With that, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't talked about on the podcast. Jack, take it away. I assume you've just seen Rise of Skywalker a bunch this week.
No, no, I don't think I can ever do that to myself. I've had a pretty slow week again. I've been working away, so I haven't been able to watch a lot since our last conversation. I've only watched 3 films, and this is included. I watched some TV.
Mhm.
I can mention that. Am I allowed to mention some TV? I watched both
Of
seasons
course.
of Vice Principals, which I fucking love. I love Walton Goggins and I love Danny McBride. It reminds me of like being stuck in an airport at JFK watching the second season. I'm like, I just like it gives me like I just love that. And I did watch a bit more Eastbound and Down, which I cannot believe a lot of that even got on TV. I remember watching that with my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, in the dorm at university, just watching 5 seasons of like this show called Eastbound and Down, and I just know, I've had to have a nostalgia trip this week because of this conversation was knowing like of how much this fucked up my affection for other things. Yeah, it's killed me. The 2 films I'm going to mention otherwise, bar this, I did watch The Fall Guy after your glowing review last week. I was like, do you know what I need to do? I need to watch The Fall Guy. Um, and it's just meh, isn't it? Like, what a very strange film. I feel like it's like halfway through turns into something else, but it's a feature that is not very funny. The action's not very good. It's not very engaging. The flow is all over the place. It's a film that feels weirdly restrictive of being a character study and then being a visual piece. Like David Leitch doing like the weird editing when he's going through the set in Australia, and then the beginning of doing the one shot cut when he gets up to the top, and I'm like, wow, like we're doing like a visualization of things, but like it just feels like for no reason. We're just doing it for the sake of it. If we're gonna go all the way through this elevator, like do a De Palma, at least make it like engaging. But it's just nothing. It's just very much flat, no heart into it. I thought Gosling was fun. I thought Blunt was gonna fucking really annoy me in it because anything that she tries to do that's not drama, I find really difficult to watch because I don't find a motive. But she was fun in this, at least. Gosling was good in it, and Hannah Waddingham was good. But Aaron Taylor Johnson was interesting. This takes a fucking turn. I know you didn't mention a lot of it in your review, but tonally, this becomes a very like dark film, and then wants to be fun, and then adds a weird cameo at the end. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Very mid, very mid. If I'm allowed to say that, down with the kids. I just did a like peace sign as well, just so they can't see me. But I feel that today, after watching this Star Wars: New Hope, I needed to like detox myself and go back into another franchise. And very strangely, I decided to watch Psycho 2. Yes, your face there is you'll maybe shocked here. I thought it was perfect. Really. I thought it was like the perfect sequel that wanted to analyze the effects of the first film while also stand up on its own 2 feet, while also make a future for itself. Um, I'm shocked of how good it looked. It sounds brilliant anyway because the Bernard Herrmann score, but it looks very good. It's very claustrophobic because it's shot in 185.1. There's no black bar, so once you're in that house, it's fucking suffocating. But Anthony Perkins was really good in it, and Vera Miles is in it from the original. Meg Tilly was very good, very weird. This takes a lot of risks, not risks that are bold, more risks that are like perplexing if they would get away with it, like how it wants to echo the original, how it really sort of makes Anthony Perkins' character not a villain but a tragedy, especially with the mental illness aspect. It does a very good job of analysing that and saying that people are still manipulating him in a way, and how that works, and then how it comes at the end, and sort of has a cycle that he was just failed, like failed from a aspect of his, because it has another twist ending that adds more context to the first film as well, which I don't want to spoil for anyone. I mean, it is from 1983, but the director Richard Franklin, I was like, oh, I hope to God this is not like a TV thing. And looking at like Richard Franklin's movies, like I've not seen anything, which is a really, really bad sign. But he directed it really well. It's nowhere near Hitchcock level. Like there's no visualization whatsoever. There's no cinematic technique, but it's very much well crafted in the fact that there'll be a sequence that starts in a room, let's say towards the end. I won't spoil anything, but we're at the side of a table, and a character knocks at the door, and as this character comes in, we ultimately go up to the top of the roof and then come back down. Very good, very very cool, but very subconscious stuff. One thing I want to end on very briefly about the film, though, they actually had the audacity to ask Brian De Palma to direct it, and I was thinking about it today, driving home. I was like, he couldn't have done that. Like, there's no way he could have, because he would have been like fucking destroyed as a hack. Like, all the Hitchcock hack is actually like making a sequel to his work. But actually, on reflection, I think that'd have been absolutely like so fascinating to watch a director who has been influenced by Hitchcock make a sequel to one of his films, and very much a direct sequel, not a inspiration, like a direct. I think that would have been fascinating to Palm, and also probably would have been his commercial hit in the 80s, because I know he did like he goes on to do Body Double and Dress to Kill, which very and then he does Casualties of War. And then within that time, the Untouchables as well. Obviously, Scarface. There's a lot throughout the 80s he does, but that would have been fascinating. But I only watched that. I didn't get to see a lot, so I'm very intrigued to see what you've been doing to pick up the slack.
Well, there's one more film you didn't mention, Furiosa. You saw. How was
Oh,
that?
I did, yeah. I reviewed it. Yes, I saw it last Sunday before the podcast we did. I thought it was outstanding. I thought it was excellent. I mean, I've heard a lot of people. I know Max has said this. I don't know if it's in jest about being ageist, but for a director 80 to make that film is absolutely like flawless. I hate the fact when Hitchcock like sort of ran into a wall, and De Palma does a certain, like Lucas, they hit like certain stumbling blocks at their age because they just don't feel up to it, or that they fall out of love with it. Um, Furiosa is a director who feels like 25. I cannot believe like he's making stuff like this at that age. Not because of his age, but because like his enthusiasm, he's enthralled with the stuff. I thought there was a lot to worry about here. The previews didn't look very good. The CGI element of it, especially the digitalization of it, all looked quite off kilter. Watching it in a theater, I don't know if you know this. I went to go watch this at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it wouldn't start, and it cut out during a Deadpool Wolverine bit about putting your phone away. And I was like, fourth wall, like halfway through a conversation, just cut out, and it burned out the fucking theater. The digital projector, it burned it out. It took them 3 hours to restart it, so they put me in another screening, and I went to go watch it in the fake view IMAX, and it was extraordinary to watch. Never had an issue with the digital color of it. I thought it looked amazing. It sounded amazing. There are two things I didn't like about it. The first one is that I don't think Praetorian Jack and her relationship is as strong as people are putting out. There's a lot of people adding to that and subtextual context because of Fury Road. I'm not too keen on that. the sort of like small addition of Mad Max in there is like, why you don't need to do that, you don't need to put him in. And finally, for me personally, I just don't like how it bookends with the ending of Fury Road. Just let it end. You don't need to have her like meet these women and then like this. I'm not to spoil anything, but like escape off to the war rig. We know that's coming. Just end it. There's a lot. I know it's a brave film. The first 45 minutes of it are like fucking exhilarating. Like so the exhilarating. Her and her mother when she's a child before she escapes Erectus. Like genuinely like probably maybe best hour 45 minutes I've seen in a long time. I just thought it felt like something I'd never seen before, which is strange, but it just felt fucking whew, like it was amazing to watch. But yeah, I just forget about it because I did the review, but I thought it was a really good stuff. Have you seen it yet?
I've not. I'm seeing it this week, which I'm excited for, but no, I've not yet, sadly. Um, as far as what I've seen, we're recording this a bit out of schedule. We're recording this June 2nd, just for context. So I finished my Palme d'Or series I was watching. I watched Orson Welles' Othello,
Oh
which was
wow,
good, but there's this like trend, and it's not as bad here as it was for Cohen's tragedy of Macbeth for me, but there's this trend of taking these Shakespeare epics and trying to reduce them down to like 90 minutes, which I appreciate cleaning them up a bit. I think with Macbeth, it was
yeah,
detrimental for me. With this one, it's just like, it has no time to breathe. It has no time to have that gravity and that weight and that size of a Shakespeare production. But as far as like everything within the film, everything technically is really great here. But it just lacks some of that impact because of just how reduced and how quick they try to make them. And it's a trend you see in a lot of these adaptations, which just, I don't know, it kind of frustrates me. Miracle in Milan was very odd as a Palme d'Or winner. A lot of these are super dark, obviously, super like dramatic, sad, and this is like a little bit of like fantasy comedy that was really lovely, like a little mint after a great dinner, where it was just like, oh, I've been watching all this great cinema, and this was just a little bit of joy. And the exact opposite, I finally watched 2012's Amour, which was just devastating. Not a very fun
oh
film.
yeah,
Just a slowly just death. I'm not even a big fan of that director. I've not seen quite a few of his films, and they've kind of, his slower style doesn't necessarily speak to me a lot of the time. Here, I thought it was really excellently done. And then that was closing that series. And then I'm obviously watching a lot of queer films for Pride Month. I watched The Celluloid Closet, I'll mention, which, if you know the history of queerness in cinema, it's hard to say this is super worthwhile and super groundbreaking, but like undoubtedly fundamental if you're someone who doesn't know the history of like, why is there no gay films in 1950s? Or like, where's the queerness in the history of cinema? This is like a needed watch, but those are where I've been watching. So good stuff. It's been a good week. Taking
yes.
a look at what is to come, there was some scheduling switches around just because of my recording availability. So this came out this weekend. Next week will be our review of The Watchers. The week after that will be Kinds of Kindness, the new Yorgos Lanthimos film. And then finally on the weekend of the 30th, we'll be back for summer blockbusters with a Patreon episode, so only available on Patreon, everyone, for Jurassic Park. We're jumping
Oh
16
wow.
years in the future, and we're doing Jurassic Park. So you mentioned Colin Trevorrow. We'll talk about the legacy of that series, but I'm excited, and that will be a fun to revisit, going
Oh
back
my god,
to our
wow.
boy. So we'll see. With that, where can we find you on social media, Jack? If we want more Jak-Luke, where are you found?
But Letterbox and Twitter, but Letterbox is where the love and affection of
Did
all
you say
these
your
reviews.
handles on Twitter even?
Yeah, yeah. I'm so burnt out from this chat. This feels like an old Uncut Gems. It's killed me.
No, Star Wars is
Yeah,
exhausting. Like,
God,
if you
I.
podcast about Star Wars, oh, it's a
Yeah.
lot.
My username is at Jak-Luke Sharp. I'm gonna have to stop. You please start talking, please, because I'm dying here.
You can find me on Twitter at pp_movie reviews. Letterboxd Carson Timar. Thank you so much for listening. Like I said, we'll be back next week for The Watchers. I'm excited for it. We'll be talking
Yes.
about it. Goodbye.